Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers McSwine.
Welcome to this week's National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. I am your co-host, Florence Myers McSwine, and we have your host, Mr. Lee Martin, and our special guest today is Mr. David Neifeld. So, Mr. Neifeld, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Are you a subscriber to Newsline?
I am.
Now we have our newspapers, magazines, and right now what's really popular is breaking news because of everything that's going on around us. This COVID thing has a very interesting in what's going on, and breaking news makes it so much easier for us to have access to everything. Wouldn't you agree, Lee?
Yes, and David, I want to also welcome you to the show. And we enjoyed speaking with your lovely wife last week. And it's just a pleasure to have you on as well. As Florence was indicating, we have a lot of attention here lately devoted to our breaking news category. And in our breaking news category, there are 34 publications. And it's the breaking news online, and it's done through their web. And what breaking news does for us is we have certain publications on there out of those 34. Some of those are ABC, BBC, CBS, CNN, Fox, Huffington, as well as NPR. So there's a lot of good publications there. And what makes it breaking news is that every hour we pull something from the web and it goes into each one of those 34 publications. And it also retains the content that was there previously. So it makes a great tool for each of us, individuals or all individuals. Matter of fact, it's just technology that's, breaking for everyone and giving us all an opportunity, those that are blind and visually impaired. We also have on there, on our NFB Newsline, we have 13 national publications, such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the USA Today, and the United Press International. Those are just a few of the publications that we are able to access through this great National Federation of the Blind service. We also have children's publications, which Florence will talk about. We also have 5 Spanish newspapers, and we also have, and I would recommend this to the veterans out there, the Stars and Stripes. This month's May, Stars and Stripes with Memorial Day was absolutely, it's just must read. You must read it. And so it covers, Stars and Stripes covers all 5 of the military branches of our armed forces. So I would say check that out. And Florence, you want to talk a little bit about our 90 magazines that we have?
I certainly may. I certainly can, Lee. As you mentioned, we do have magazines for children. There is one in particular, Stone Soup, that children just love. And I also enjoy reading it as well. There's AARP magazine for people who are seniors, such as myself. There's a lot of great information there. There's Consumers Digest. There's also Diabetes Forecasts and Diabetic Living for people that are diabetic. It gives a lot of information on what's out there for people that are diabetic, as well as a lot of useful, very useful information about helpful recipes as well. There is, statistically, there's at least 34% of Americans who are coping with the diabetes at this time. Did you know that, Lee?
Yes, and I tell you, there's a lot of information up there with the American Diabetes Association. I would say go to their website, and it's very crucial that we pay much attention to diabetes, which is the number one or the leading cause of blindness. So we're going to take a short pause, and we're going to come back with our guest, David Neufeld, and stay tuned.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
Wow, I scored a touchdown when I found sports on NFB Newsline.
I enjoy reading TV guide listings on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind. We read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Well, welcome back to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana with our special guest today, Mr. David Neufeld. Now, David, again, welcome to our show. And if you would tell us a little bit about you.
So I grew up in a small town in Arizona. And because of that, I think I was the only blind person around, really. There was a college professor, actually, that taught chemistry that went blind from a chemistry accident. But I never really considered myself blind growing up. So I grew up doing all the things boys do, getting in trouble, riding your bike down to the river when you're not supposed to, doing all kinds of things. My mom's told me 100 times that I was stubbornly independent. So I don't know how many times he told me I had to tell him where I was going and when I was going, because I thought I could just do whatever I wanted, I guess. But I grew up, hunting and fishing and just getting out in the wilderness as well. A lot of fun things. But just a small town life there.
So you were, what was your sight acuity at that time? Because you said you did hunting and fishing and getting in trouble and bikes and all that. So
back then, I always considered myself, I'd say, I just couldn't see that well. I can't see quite as good as everybody else. I can't see the stop sign at the end of the block, but I can see it. It's just a red dot instead of reading the word. Or, I could read out of a book, but I'd hold it right up to my nose instead of, down on my lap. In my mind at that point, I always thought, I'm not blind. I just can't see that well. It was a whole different mindset. Looking back now, I'm like, I was a blind person and I really should have learned, how to be a better blind person at that time. But, I didn't. And I think it worked out in some ways a little bit better because I didn't put any limitations on myself. I do everything everybody else was doing. But at the same time, there was probably a lot of useful tools and techniques that I could have used way back then too.
So what was your medical diagnosis and what age were you diagnosed with being blind?
So I have what's called ROP, or retinopathy of prematurity. Pretty common out there. But that was diagnosed even when I was a baby. When I was a baby, they said, oh, he's totally blind. He can't see anything. But at my house, they did little things to try to identify if I was blind. And one of the things they did is they put Christmas lights up all around the fish tank of all places. And one day my grandma was carrying me around and they said that I was reaching for those lights. So they figured out I could see some at that point. So I was diagnosed even when I was really little. But because I could see some, I think a lot of the time they thought that well, he can see some, he can read from a book. So why doesn't he just do that? I didn't really learn a lot of alternatives. Now, I'll tell you when I realized I was blind. That happened one day when I was 26. I was living in the Phoenix area, and I was riding a bus home from school, and everything went black. So my retina had detached. I didn't know that at the time, of course. I knew everything went black. So I heard my bus stop. I got off the bus, and I listened to other people walking, and I followed them because I knew they were going back towards the corner. And somehow I made it home. I was a little freaked out. I'd say after about 10 minutes, some vision came back enough that I could see like streetlights and stuff. So I made it safely home, but that was a pretty nerve-wracking experience at the time. But I've always been stubbornly independent. And so I just figured it out, right? I could hear somebody walking, I followed them. Probably not, kind of a creepy thing to do, I guess, thinking about it now, but what do you do?
Now, when you continue to have failing eyesight, did that bring any fear to you at all, or was you still being, what you call stubborn to that degree, to overcome that?
Yeah, I would say I took it as an opportunity to view the world in a different way. I think there was some fear there for sure. I was very nervous about things. I didn't know how I would do stuff, but I kind of took a look inside myself and I said, well, not everybody gets to learn how to view the world in a whole new way. And that's how I took it. Part of the reason I did that is I was working at the time for a wilderness program where we would take young, like high school age kids on a backpack trip that they were like troubled teens. And so they had opportunities to change their life. And so I was very self-reflective at the time. So I really took a lot of thought into it and thought, well, how can, something that a lot of people perceive to be a negative experience, how do I make that to be a little more positive? And that's what I came up with, to just decide that I get to learn to view the world in a whole new way. And that helped me a lot. And I realized that's not how a lot of people do things, but I think it can help too, to just realize that you're learning something new.
Okay, now David, now prior to your age 26, where you were considered yourself being blind then, were you using a cane prior to then?
So I was and I wasn't. In one of my college classes, somebody could tell I couldn't see that well. And they were an O&M specialist for like middle school age kids. And so he said, here, I brought this for you. You're going to need this at some point. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. And I think I shoved it in my backpack and I never pulled it out again until I had that happen at 26. And, it was helpful. It definitely helped me not run into a few things, but because he worked with middle-aged kids, he gave me a cane that came up to my belly button. So for a lot of people, that's a little bit too short, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we can talk about that a little bit later in the show.
Absolutely.
Yes, because it seems like you had a lot of experiences prior to becoming your professional person that you are nowadays. So we're going to take a short pause, and we're going to come right back and speak some more with our main man, David.
I'm Danny Wayne Beamer, Program Manager of the Elder Blind Program at the Will Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. I introduce the NFB Newsline to seniors in 13 southwestern counties in Indiana. I also utilize the NFB Newsline for my radio station public affairs shows. The NFB Newsline. Experience it today.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
Welcome to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana. And we were talking with you, David. And David, we would like to find out more about you and how you came into, first of all, the National Federation of the Blind and where you are now. So can you give us just a little bit more information about you?
Yeah. So when I first lost my sight, my mom was looking for resources online, and she found a phone number for the state president of the National Federation of the Blind of Arizona. And I called that number, and sure enough, they said, well, we have local chapter meetings. You can come out to one. And I went out to a chapter meeting. And while I was there was somebody reporting. They had taken a trip to Colorado, and they went to a training center. And they said, and at the training center, we went whitewater rafting and rock climbing and skiing and snowboarding. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. Sign me up. So that's a little bit of how I got introduced to do things, really. But it all combined itself. So I learned about the National Federation of the Blind. Same day I learned about training centers, about the Colorado Center for the Blind in particular. And then, it's continued on from there.
So what is the Colorado Center for the Blind, and what are the functions of it?
So the Colorado Center for the Blind is a training center for primarily blind adults. We have a senior program, and in the summer we have an elementary and a high school program as well. So it's a training center for everybody. Our main program is what's called Independence Training Program, and that's for adults or people right out of high school. And it trains people, how to be independent. So they learn things like how to be literate, read Braille, write Braille, how to use different technology, how to cook in the kitchen, clean, and how to travel around. We have a few different classes as well that help people build some extra confidence. We have an art class, we have a woodworking and home maintenance class, and we do other various activities like I mentioned earlier, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, skiing.
And I imagine you learn how to shovel snow out there in Colorado in the wintertime, right?
Oh, yes. That's one of my favorite classes to teach, mostly because everybody groans and moans. So then I'm more positive, even more excited about it. Some people actually end up liking it. We had somebody from Nevada last year that came out and they got to shovel snow for the first time. It was a lot.
Wow. So the National Federation of the Blind, that's one of the training centers. And they have two other training centers, Minnesota and also in Louisiana. And for individuals that want to know more about those, you can always go to nfb.org and learn a lot more. David, while you were there at the training center, something very special happened in your life. You want to share that with us?
Yeah. So I went through training and I started teaching in the residential program. And after a little while, there became a position open in the orientation mobility program. And so I started teaching people how to get to and from their apartments. And while there, a lady you may have heard of before, her name's Maureen. She came into the program, went through as a student, and, we probably were a little extra friendly, definitely smiled at each other on occasion. Those little things that kind of let you know, hey, something might be going on here. And so when she graduated her program, I asked her out and she said yes. And the rest is, I'd say, a little bit of history, right? She started working at the center at that time too. So I knew she was sticking around. Maybe that helped, right? Helped me ask her out. Unless she's staying around, I better get her where I can, kind of a thing. And I even proposed to her, and we have, at the Colorado Center, we have morning announcements every morning. So I proposed to her right in morning announcements. It made a little disruption for that whole day, but it was worth it. She likes to be in front of the camera and in the spotlight. So I figured that was the place to do it just for her.
Okay, and now you two have been married for how long, David?
We have been married for almost 9 years. It'll be 9 years here in August.
Awesome. And you said that she likes being in front of the spotlight, and I have had the opportunity of listening to you both on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast that you and Marina are doing.
Yeah, so we started a podcast. It's called Breaking Blind podcast. And that's because she's done a YouTube channel for years and years, and talked about some different techniques for being a blind person and doing things, and a good demonstration on YouTube. But we thought we'd get into some of the details, and so we thought we'd be able to do that a little better on a podcast. And it's for blind people, so you can learn just as easily from a podcast as a YouTube video. So right now we're just starting our first season. We're focusing on cane travel, because that's one of the, it's a big barrier for people when they first become blind. And it's not to say that this will be like a supplement or something you could do instead of going to a training center, but it'll at least give people a good start to be able to learn about different techniques to be an independent blind person.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about your techniques for cane travel.
I mentioned earlier that the first cane I had came up to my belly button. I have found out since that is way, way too short, and it explains why, I greeted a few bowls and a few trash cans along my traveling when I first went blind. So now I recommend a cane that comes up to a person's nose, or maybe even a little above. It depends how fast you're walking. But a lot of things have changed from what I first tried to figure out on my own to what I've learned today. And I think a lot of that is referenced in the podcast to some extent. Another fun note about the podcast is that in the background, you get to hear our son talking, and he's talking about various things from trucks to airplanes and trees. But he likes to be out and doing things. So I'll carry him around on my back in a backpack, and he can, he's he's probably the star of the show, and I'm just a side note, really.
So how old is your son?
He is 20 months.
Okay.
So almost 2.
Well, now tell us about the orientation and mobility, as you are an orientation and mobility specialist. You said a lot of things have changed, and with this COVID-19, how has it changed in your structured discovery for individuals that are blind, being as though we as a blind community do a lot of the touch and feel?
Yeah. So when we had this whole pandemic start, we had to change some of our program. Our center in particular, we'd sent people that came to our center from out of state home. And then people that stuck around, we kind of worked with them to develop their skills where they're at. So if they were capable of crossing streets before, we had them work on that some more. And if they were just learning how to use a cane, we had them walk up the block and back down to their apartment using their cane. As we start back up here in this next week, there'll be a little less touchy-feely. Like a lot of times as a cane travel instructor, in order to tell that somebody's lined up at an intersection, you might touch their shoulders to see if they're facing the right direction. But I think we'll be using a lot more of alternative techniques. So we'll maybe use our cane to check that their feet are facing the right way. It's another technique that works just as well. And it still keeps that a pretty good distance. I'd say it might be breaking a little bit of that 6-foot rule, but it's a lot better than coming right up on somebody and having to touch them all the time. And there's various other techniques. Of course, we're going to do the best we can with what we got. So that's going to be a lot of problem solving as we go along as well.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here from some O&M instructors here in Indiana. One is Ronald Brown, and the question coming from him is, what do you ever run into incidents where people may have a little hesitancy about having a blind O&M instructor?
Yeah. So a lot of people are nervous about there being a blind person teaching them O&M. It usually goes away pretty quickly, but I'll tell them, who is better to learn from? Somebody that does this every day, or somebody that just understands the theories of how to be an O&M instructor. I've also had a few students tell me that after I worked with them for a couple weeks, they said, "Oh, you are really blind." I said, "Yeah, I am."
And David, one final question for you on this mobility and orientation and mobility is, how are you able to monitor a student if you can't see them or what they are doing?
Well, the easiest way is to pay attention to what their canes are doing. So I've worked with up to 4 students at the same time, and you can hear every individual cane up ahead of you. And I guess that's one thing, is I walk behind the students so I can hear them in front of me. And then if they tap something, I know, hey, there's a pole there. Or if they veer off to the side, you can hear a different sound when their cane hits a curve.
Okay. All right, so on that one there, we're going to take this final break, and we will be right back.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
As I travel the nation, I read NFB Newsline.
I live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and I listen to my local news on NFB Newsline.
As a student, I enjoy reading current events on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
Welcome back to the conclusion of our show. And Lee, we're going to end with a final question for Mr. Neufeld.
Yes, David, final question here is, what piece of advice would you have for an individual that is newly blind, that is seeking orientation or mobility instruction?
Yeah, so somebody that is new to being blind, I think that they should, not limit themselves as far as what they can do, and then seek out a training center, somebody that's certified in national orientation and mobility, so that they can get that training that they need to get out and do the things that they want to do.
Well, we want to thank you so very much for coming onto our show, and we wish you the best. So take good care, and thank you for joining us once again. This is our second virtual show, and I trust that it works out well. So take good care, and God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.